I was 21 years old in 1944, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking even when I clenched them into fists. Not from the cold, though it was cold enough, but from the sound. Tracks, steel on frozen ground. You don't forget that sound once you've heard it close. We were dug in along a shallow rise in the hedgerows, somewhere in France that barely showed up on the maps they gave us. The kind of place you're told to hold at all costs, even when nobody explains what those costs might be. I remember thinking, real clear, that I wasn't ready to die in a field that didn't even have a proper name. Word came down the line just before first light. German armor was moving, not probing, not scouting, moving with purpose. That alone was bad enough. What made it worse was how calm the message sounded when it reached us, passed from mouth to mouth like routine business, as if tanks rolling straight at your position was just another item on the morning checklist. I was infantry, boots in the mud, rifle across my knees, trying to breathe slow. The air smelled like wet earth, burned cordite from the night before, and something metallic I'd learned to associate with fear. Someone behind me muttered a prayer. Someone else laughed, too loud, like he was trying to scare the sound away. Then I saw them. The first silhouettes broke through the morning haze, low, squat shapes, moving steady, confident. German tanks, advancing in a column like they owned the road, like nothing in front of them could stop that weight of steel. Each one felt closer than the last, even before they actually were. That was the moment it hit me that this wasn't going to be one of those stories you tell later with a grin. This was the kind you carry quietly, if you carry it at all, because something was already wrong. We were too exposed, too still, and somewhere behind us, someone had made a decision that was about to erase a lot of men in a very short amount of time, enemy and otherwise. And none of us in that ditch had any say in it. We'd been in that sector for 5 days, maybe 6. Time stopped lining up right once the shelling started. Our platoon was dug in along a sunken farm road, hedgerows thick on both sides, mud packed so hard with boot prints it looked like corduroy. Rain came and went, but the damp never left. Your socks stayed wet, your hands stayed numb, your thoughts stayed loud. I was with a rifle squad in the 29th Infantry Division, regular line infantry, nothing fancy. We did security, dug holes, pulled guard, and waited for orders that never came fast enough. My squad leader was a staff sergeant named Callahan, thin, sharp eyes, voice like gravel. He'd been in since North Africa and trusted almost nothing except artillery and distance. Rule 1, he told me my first night there, tapping his helmet. Don't silhouette yourself. Rule 2, don't assume quiet means safe. Rule 3, when armor shows up, you pray the guns behind us are awake. Behind us meant the artillery batteries, 105s and 155s dug in miles back, invisible but always present in your mind. You could feel them when they fired, a low punch through the ground before the sound reached you. They were our real muscle. We just held the line long enough for them to do their work. The routine was simple and miserable. Stand to before dawn, check weapons, count ammo, eat cold rations if you felt like it, smoke when you shouldn't, listen to the radio traffic crackle and fade. Somewhere to our left, another unit had taken casualties the night before. We could smell it when the wind shifted, burned fuel and something sweeter underneath. I carried an M1, 8 rounds in the clip, bayonet fixed more often than not. We had a bazooka team nearby, but nobody pretended it was enough if a whole column came through. The lieutenant, fresh, clean helmet, trying hard not to look scared, kept checking his map like it might change if he stared long enough. When dawn finally broke, it didn't bring light so much as a dull grey smear across the sky. That's when the ground started to hum, not loud yet, just enough to feel it in your knees. Callahan spat into the mud and said, almost to himself, "That's too many." And that's when I understood something basic about war they never teach you. Sometimes the battlefield tells you what's coming before the radios do. Our first real contact that morning didn't come from the tanks. It came from their infantry, grey shapes moving along the tree line, keeping pace with the armor like they'd done it 100 times before. They knew the drill. We did too. Let the lead elements get close enough to commit, then pin them down and call for fire. Callahan passed the word down the line. No shooting unless you had a clear shot. No heroics. The kind of orders that sound calm until you realize how hard they are to follow when your pulse is hammering in your ears. I remember watching my front sight settle on a helmet, then drift away as the man disappeared behind a hedge. Training tells you to breathe, squeeze, control. Reality tells you to hurry before he does something that gets you killed. The first shots cracked off to our right, then to our left, and suddenly the whole line came alive. The German infantry hit the dirt fast, disciplined, returning fire in short bursts. MG-42s opened up, that ripping sound you never confuse with anything else. Dirt sprayed over our positions, thudding into the hedgerow like hail. Someone screamed. Someone else shouted for a medic. We stayed down, firing when we could, waiting for the armor to show itself fully. The tanks kept coming. nothing. They rolled forward slow, methodical, using the road, engines steady like they weren't even aware of us. I could see the markings now, the way the light slid off the armor plates. Panzer Fees, maybe a heavier one mixed in. Hard to tell when you're looking from a hole in the ground. The lieutenant finally got through on the radio, voice tight, calling back for confirmation on fire missions. Static, then a clipped reply telling us to hold, observe, and report. Hold. Like we were holding anything other than our breath. That's when it sank in how different this was from training. On the range, targets don't advance on you. In drills, armor appears when it's supposed to. Out there, the enemy dictated the pace, and we were reacting half a step behind. Callahan crawled past me, shouting over the noise. Don't waste rounds, let them stack up. He pointed down the road where the tanks were compressing into a tighter column because of the hedgerows. I didn't like what that meant, but I liked the alternative even less. By the time the lead tank reached the bend in the road, the ground was shaking hard enough to blur my vision. I realized then that if our guns didn't answer soon, there wouldn't be much left of us to hear them. What bothered me wasn't just how many tanks there were, it was the silence from behind us. Normally by that point, you'd hear something. Engines revving, distant thumps, officers shouting into phones, some sign that the big guns were lining up their answers. Instead, there was nothing, just our small arms, the machine guns, and the steady advance of armor that didn't seem the least bit rushed. The lieutenant finally crawled up next to Callahan, helmet scraped raw on the mud. I caught bits of what he said. Fire direction was sorting it out. Grid confirmation issues. Air observation grounded because of the weather. All of it sounded like excuses that didn't help the men staring at German steel through iron sights. Callahan's jaw tightened. He didn't argue. He never did in front of the men. But when the lieutenant moved on, he leaned in close and said, low enough that only a few of us heard it, "When things get quiet like this, it means somebody higher up is thinking hard, and that's when people down here pay for it." A corporal named Reeves, older than the rest of us, been in Sicily, added, "Or when they're waiting for something big." He didn't smile when he said it. The tanks slowed near the bend, bunching up more than I'd ever seen. One stopped completely, turret traversing like it was searching for something it already knew was there. Another pulled up close behind it. They were crowding each other, trusting the road, trusting that whatever threat existed would be dealt with before it reached them. That's when the radio crackled again. Short transmission, coordinates repeated twice, then a pause that felt too long. The lieutenant's face went pale, and for a second, I thought he might say something. He didn't. He just nodded once and passed the word. Mark targets. Stand by. Stand by for what? Nobody said. I looked down the road at that compressed column of armor and infantry sheltering along the hedges. It felt wrong, too clean, too deliberate. Like we weren't meant to stop them, just to watch long enough for someone else to do something far worse. Reeves leaned over and muttered, "They're letting them get comfortable." He swallowed hard. That's never good. The ground seemed to hold its breath with us. Even the firing slackened, like both sides were waiting for the same signal. Whatever was coming, it wasn't ours to control anymore. A runner came up from battalion, hunched low, moving fast like he knew time mattered more than bullets right then. He handed the lieutenant a folded message, already smeared with mud. The lieutenant read it once, then again, slower. Whatever was on that paper changed the way he looked at the road. He called for Callahan and one of the radio men. "I wasn't meant to hear it, but you hear things when you're that close and nobody's whispering. New fire mission. Priority target. No adjustment once it started. Once the guns spoke, they were going to keep speaking. That was when I realized we weren't just holding ground anymore. We were spotters, whether anyone had bothered to tell us or not. Callahan spread us out along the hedgerow, making sure everyone had eyes on the column. "When it starts," he said, "keep your heads down. Don't get curious. Curiosity gets you killed." He paused, then added, "And don't forget what you see." The radio man finally got a clean line back to the artillery. Coordinates went out, slow and precise. Grid reference, direction, distance. I'd heard that kind of traffic before, but never with that kind of weight behind it. The guns were already laid. They'd been waiting, same as us. The German tanks were fully committed now, engines idling, crews relaxed enough to button up, infantry hugging the hedges for cover. They thought they'd found a seam. Maybe they had, just not the kind they expected. I felt something twist in my gut. Not fear exactly, but the sense that a line was being crossed. Once the first round landed, there was no calling it back. Men would die who never saw us, never fired a shot our way. War didn't care about fairness, but knowing that didn't make it sit any easier. The lieutenant gave the final nod. The radio man squeezed his handset and said the word I'd been waiting to hear, without knowing it. Fire. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the world behind us answered. The first round didn't land on the road. It landed just beyond it. A hard crack that punched dirt and smoke straight up into the grey sky. For a split second, I thought they'd missed. Then the second one hit. That one caught the tail end of the column. The explosion lifted a half-track clean off the ground. and dropped it sideways into the ditch like a toy. Men scattered, some running, some just frozen where they stood. The sound wasn't like anything from small arms. It was heavier, deeper, like the earth itself was slamming its fist down. "Adjust fire," the radio man shouted, already relaying corrections. He didn't sound excited. He sounded focused, like a mechanic tightening bolts. The third and fourth rounds walked forward, right onto the road. A tank took a direct hit along the side, armor buckling, turret snapping halfway around before stopping dead. Flames rolled out of the hatches, thick black smoke following. The concussion slapped my chest even from our position, knocking the breath out of me. That's when it became real. Not just that the artillery was firing, but that it was doing exactly what it had been meant to do. This wasn't harassment fire. This was annihilation. The Germans tried to respond. One tank fired blindly into the hedgerow, the shells screaming overhead and detonating somewhere behind us. Infantry radioed frantically, voices sharp and panicked. They were trapped now. Hedges on both sides, road blocked front and rear, nowhere to maneuver. The guns didn't let up. Rounds came in steady, methodical, timed like a metronome. High explosive, then another, then another. The column disappeared in smoke and dust, shapes reduced to silhouettes and then nothing at all. I watched men run and then fall, watched vehicles burn without moving, watched the road itself get torn apart piece by piece. Callahan kept yelling at us to stay down, to keep our heads buried, but I couldn't stop looking. Part of me needed to see it, to understand what we'd just unleashed. After about 3 minutes, maybe 4, the firing shifted again, tightening, overlapping. Someone behind me whispered, "Jesus," like a prayer and a curse at the same time. There was no doubt left. Whatever command had waited, whatever calculation had been made, this was the result. An entire armored push caught in the open, erased under coordinated fire, and the worst part was knowing it wasn't over yet. When the barrage finally lifted, the silence felt heavier than the shelling. My ears rang so hard I could barely hear Callahan shouting, but I knew the order even before I processed the words. Stay put, observe, report. Smoke hung low over the road, thick and oily, drifting sideways through the hedgerows. What had been a column was now a scatter of burning shapes. Tanks sat twisted at odd angles, tracks blown clean off, turrets jammed or torn open. Some were still moving, engines whining, metal popping as it cooled, but they weren't going anywhere. That's when we started seeing the men. German crewmen crawled out of hatches, uniforms blackened, faces raw and shining like wax. Some ran, some staggered, some just dropped beside their vehicles and didn't move again. A few tried to drag wounded comrades toward the ditch, only to collapse halfway there. No one was shooting now. There was no need. I felt something crack inside me then, something quiet. In training, they tell you artillery saves lives, ours. They don't talk about what it does to the people on the other end. Watching it up close, after the noise stops, is a different kind of lesson. The radio crackled again. Higher command wanted confirmation. Count destroyed vehicles, estimate casualties. The lieutenant's voice shook as he read off numbers that felt impossible. A full column, gone. Callahan crouched next to me, eyes fixed on the road. "Remember this," he said. "This is what modern war looks like when it works." He paused. "And this is why it never leaves you." I realized then how deliberate it had been. They'd let the armor stack up, let them feel safe. Every second of waiting had been measured. We hadn't just defended a position, we'd been bait. I didn't feel victorious, I felt hollow, like I'd crossed some line I hadn't known was there until I was already on the other side. The road ahead was quiet now, but I knew I'd be seeing it in my head for a long time, because no matter how clean the maps looked later, I was there when it happened. And seeing what coordinated fire can do to men and machines all at once changes the way you understand orders forever. We didn't move off our positions until hours later. Orders came down slow, layered with cautions and checks, like nobody quite trusted the quiet. When we finally advanced, it was careful and ugly, step by step along that ruined road. The closer we got, the worse it looked. The vehicles were still burning in places, fuel pooling in the ruts, ammunition cooking off with sharp cracks that made us flinch every time. A tank sat on its side, hull split open like it had been peeled. Inside, there were things you couldn't unsee. Callahan told us to keep moving and not stare, but it was hard not to. The smell alone told the story. Military police and intelligence types showed up not long after. Cleaner uniforms, different posture. They asked questions we didn't have good answers for. What time did the armor appear? How many vehicles before the fire mission? Did we see any insignia that mattered? They wrote things down, nodded, and moved on. A few German survivors were pulled out of the ditches, stunned and bleeding, hands shaking as much as ours had earlier. Medics worked on them same as they did on our own wounded. That part was quiet, almost gentle, and it didn't sit right next to the destruction around us. Later, the lieutenant was called back to battalion. When he returned, his shoulders were lower. He told us the official line: successful defensive action, enemy armored thrust neutralized. Then he added something else, softer. No letters home about this. no details. Hire wanted it kept tight. By nightfall, the wrecks were marked. The road closed off, and we were pulled back to a new line. The guns behind us were already repositioning, like nothing unusual had happened. The war rolled on. As we dug in again, Reeves said what everyone was thinking. They'll never talk about how close they let that get. Callahan nodded. Because if people knew, they'd start asking who decided to wait. I lay there in the dark, listening to distant engines and thinking about how a decision made miles away had turned a stretch of French road into a graveyard. We'd survived. That was the victory, but it didn't feel like one. We moved on from that sector a few days later. New hedgerows, new roads, same mud. The war didn't pause to let anyone catch up with what they'd seen. It never does. You carry it forward, or it drags you down where you stand. I made it through the rest of the campaign somehow, crossed rivers I couldn't pronounce, took towns that were already half dead, lost men whose voices I could still pick out in my sleep. When Germany finally folded, people celebrated. I remember the noise, the laughter, the sense that something had lifted. But that road in France stayed exactly where it was in my head. After I got home, nobody wanted details. They asked if it was bad, then nodded when I said yes, like that covered it. I took a job, learned how to smile at the right times, figured out which memories to keep quiet. Some nights, though, I'd hear it again. The distant thump before the sound, the way the ground warned you before the shells landed. I never forgot how deliberate it all had been. The waiting, the patience, the knowledge that destruction works best when you let it build. That understanding crept into things it didn't belong in. How I judged decisions, how I trusted people who said they had time. I still think about the men in that column. Not in a guilty way, exactly. More like an awareness. They did what they were told. So did we. The difference was who had the guns lined up first. War teaches you that survival isn't always about courage or skill. Sometimes it's about being on the right side of a calculation you'll never see. That's a hard thing to live with, even long after the uniforms are put away. I'm an old man now, and the world looks different when you've had decades to think about a few minutes of your life. People like to talk about war in terms of victories and losses, lines on maps that move forward or back. They don't talk much about the waiting, or what it means to be part of something that works exactly as designed. That day in France taught me that the most powerful moments in war aren't always loud. Sometimes they're planned in quiet rooms, far from the mud and the fear, by people who will never smell burned metal or hear a man scream for his crew while the flames climb. By the time the noise reaches them, the decision's already old. I don't tell this story to make anyone feel proud or ashamed. I tell it because it's honest. Because there's a difference between surviving a battle and understanding what survived inside you afterward. For me, it was the knowledge that obedience and efficiency can erase human lives faster than anger ever could. If there's a lesson in it, it's a simple one. War doesn't just test weapons or tactics. It tests how much distance you can put between a decision and its consequences before it stops feeling like yours. I was there when an armored column disappeared in minutes. I lived because the math worked out in my favor, and that's what stays with you. Not the sound of the guns, but the silence that comes after, when you realize how easily it could have been you on that road instead.